Mass in memory of a slain priest.
Uomo buono.
Pope Francis holds up Father Jacques Hamel's selfless example of courage. Refugee dilemma, the difficult balance between national security and human compassion. Family plan, presidential campaigns outline their child care proposals. And communion questions. Dr. Chad Pecknold explains church teaching on divorced Catholics and the sacraments. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, September 14th, 2016. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Pope Francis celebrates Mass this morning on this feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross in memory of Father Jacques Hamel.
Uomo buono, mite, di fratellanza, che sempre cercava di fare la pace.
Pope Francis calls Father Hamel a good man who always tried to make peace. The French priest was killed by Islamic extremists while celebrating morning Mass in late July. Police killed his assailants, and the Islamic State group claimed responsibility. In his homily today, Francis denounced the slaying as the satanic thread of persecution. Alan Holdren, Rome Bureau Chief for EWTN's Catholic News Agency, joins us. Alan, describe this morning's Casa Santa Marta Mass in memory of Father Jacques Hamel.
Well, Brian, there were about 80 people there from the French Diocese of Rouen, which is the diocese of Father Jacques, also from his parish. His bishop was there, as was his sister. It's a very simple Mass. There was a picture of Father on the altar, and on the other side of the altar was just a little bouquet of pink roses. Pope Francis celebrated the Mass. There was a little bit of French during the readings. The Pope gave his homily in Italian. It was translated simultaneously into French. And in his homily, he spoke of Father as one of the latest Christian martyrs in a chain of Christian martyrs that goes back all the way to Christ himself.
So while not officially declaring this French priest a martyr, didn't he actually infer that?
He did. He spoke of Father Jacques as a blessed. He said that we should pray for his intercession in heaven for fraternity, peace, meekness, and also the courage to tell the truth here on earth. He said also afterwards to a bishop that was there at the Mass from France that people should look to Father Jacques as what the Church calls a blessed, someone who's officially recognized as a martyr, a process that usually takes a long time, but the Pope just started referring to him as such today.
What did the Holy Father reveal about the last moments of Father Jacques' life?
He said that his murderers, right before killing Father Jacques, he turned and faced them and accused them. He said, "Begone, Satan," is what Father Jacques said in his last moments. The Pope said that this was very telling. The Father, in all of his goodness and his meekness, he said he recognized the diabolical influence on these assassins as they took Father Jacques' life. He said that this was a thread of persecution that you see in this cruelty that these assassins took this priest's life, asking him to deny his faith. The Pope also said that he wishes that all religions would recognize that killing in the name of God is satanic.
Alan Holdren, Catholic News Agency on EWTN. Alan, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Father Hamel's family and friends were given front row seats for today's general audience in St. Peter's Square. Pope Francis talked about today's feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. He says we should find comfort in the cross since Jesus continues his work of redemption in the life of every man. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. The Obama administration wants to dramatically increase the number of refugees accepted into the U.S. As Wyatt Goolsbee reports tonight, some members of Congress aren't so sure.
Brian, Secretary of State John Kerry says the White House set a new goal of accepting 110,000 refugees next year, maybe even more, but some Republicans say it risks national security.
We know that jihadists are looking at every route into America, from sneaking across the southwest border to flying in as tourists and as refugees.
Republicans in the House's Homeland Security Committee worry about the White House plan to increase the number of refugees. Top immigration and security officials describe the national security risks.
ISIS has told us that it planned to exploit the refugee system as a way to execute terrorist attacks.
Republicans like John Ratcliffe point to this week's terror arrests in Germany, where 3 Syrian nationals were taken into custody. The suspects allegedly received support from the same people behind November's deadly terror attack in Paris.
We're no longer talking about a hypothetical situation.
Undersecretary Francis Taylor and others from the Department of Homeland Security explained in detail the vetting process for screening refugees, which they say is even more extensive than the ones in Europe.
We have professionals who do this every day.
Democrat Benny Thompson agrees the threats are real, but he says the United States needs to balance the risks with the country's openness to immigrants.
I would not want our borders to all of a sudden be closed to people who are seeking a better way. If that happens, the terrorists have won.
The debate between Republicans and Democrats extends to the presidential campaign. Donald Trump made headlines when he proposed a temporary ban on Muslims entering the country. Hillary Clinton says she wants to increase the amount of Syrian refugees per year by more than 50,000.
Neither the State Department nor the White House has officially announced their refugee numbers for next year. The report on Kerry's closed-door meeting with members comes from a State Department official who has remained anonymous. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt Goolsby. Police search for a suspect accused of setting fire to a Muslim woman's clothing in New York City. This video shows the suspect, who the woman says had a lighter in his hand. The woman from Scotland was walking along Fifth Avenue Saturday wearing a hijab. When she realized her blouse was burning, she quickly put out the fire on her sleeve and alerted police. Investigators questioned at least 3 other witnesses. Donald Trump facing more backlash tonight from members of his own party. Former Secretary of State Colin Powell criticizes the Republican nominee in private emails leaked to the public. In these emails, Powell labels Trump, quote, a national disgrace and an international pariah. Powell also criticized Hillary Clinton for trying to equate her own email practices with his. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton get help from their daughters in promoting their respective child care plans. Ivanka Trump says her father supports 6 weeks of paid maternity leave, tax deductions for stay-at-home parents, and tax breaks for families. Chelsea Clinton says her mom favors 12 weeks of paid leave for new parents, free preschool for 4-year-olds, and capping child care expenses at 10%.
You know, it matters to me that she understands how important early childhood education is, that she understands how important it is that we support parents in our role as our children's first teacher.
This is not a women's issue. It's a family issue. It's an American issue. It's an issue that's often been discussed, but has yet to be solved. My father plans to change that.
Trump says his plan will bring relief to working and middle-class families. The Bishop of Richmond refutes Tim Kaine's comments about marriage. The Democratic vice presidential nominee believes the Catholic Church will eventually support the redefinition of marriage, but Bishop Francis DiLorenzo disagrees. He says the Catholic Church's 2,000-year-old teaching to the truth about what constitutes marriage remains unchanged and resolute. He says all people deserve respect, but our understanding of marriage is a matter of justice and fidelity to our Creator's original design. Pope Francis voices support for a pastoral approach, allowing some remarried divorcees to receive Holy Communion. In a letter to bishops in his native Argentina, Francis affirms their new guidelines. He says the document is very good, there are no other interpretations, and I am certain it will do much good. Dr. Chad Pecknold is a professor of theology at the Catholic University of America. First, clarify the church teaching on this issue, if you would.
Well, the church teachings is in obedience to Christ's teaching that the marriage is indissoluble. It's not something that can be unbound. The church will decide in cases of nullity that the marriage wasn't there to begin with, or that the married couple will be chaste and celibate. And if they're not, if there's no nullity and there's no celibacy, then there's no communion.
So this letter is getting a lot of attention. Does it have papal authority? How should Catholics interpret this?
Well, it's a letter from the Bishop of Rome to one of his brother bishops in Argentina, affirming, supporting his intent to advise his priests for pastoral implementation of Amoris Laetitia. That's it. It's not a magisterial teaching. It's just a letter of support.
So a lot of this confusion surrounds Chapter 8 of that document. Why is it so confusing?
Yeah, Chapter 8 has created a lot of controversy because it talks a lot about an internal form of discernment in which you might find mitigating culpability for people to be admitted to communion. And the unclarity of Amoris Laetitia has led to some debate over its interpretation. Thus, the Pope's letter about no other possible interpretations raises questions about what the Argentinian bishops think it means, and that we don't really know.
Discernment huge in the formation of Jesuits.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how would you attempt to clear up this confusion as a theology professor?
Yeah, well, I think, we want to affirm that the Church's teaching is what the Church's teaching is. We can read the Catechism, we can go to the Church's teaching on marriage and see that we support the indissolubility of marriage. When we get to questions that are hard about pastoral discernment, we have to trust that the Church is walking and accompanying everybody, and in doing so, it's not going to chuck out the objective truths of the Catholic faith.
So we are not looking at a fundamental change here.
No.
At all.
And I think, in a sense, it's a mistake to try to pit the Church's teachings against pastoral sensitivities to human needs. And
excellent
pain.
point.
Yeah.
Dr. Chad Pecknold, the Catholic University of America. Always good to see you, Chad. Thank you.
Always good to be here. Thanks.
Coming up, surprise storm, tropical weather forms over land in Florida. And internet freedom. Lawmakers wrestle with the future of cyberspace. Tropical Storm Julia becomes the 10th named storm of the Atlantic hurricane season. This surprise storm formed over land last night just west of Jacksonville, Florida. Tropical storms usually form over water before moving inland. Julia is forecast to weaken to a tropical depression. Heavy rain could still cause flash flooding along coastal Georgia and South Carolina. Meanwhile, Super Typhoon Meranti batters the southern tip of Taiwan, making its way toward China. It continues to weaken but is still hammering the island with heavy rain and damaging winds. Meranti is expected to make landfall on mainland China within hours. A red alert is issued, with the main concern being a tremendous amount of rain. Good evening. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. I'm Brian Patrick. There's a lot of concern about a profound change in the internet that some believe could affect our online freedom. Jason Calvi is joining us from Capitol Hill with that story. Jason?
Ryan, think about when you visit a website, for example, EWTN.com, you get that actual website. That's because there's a global internet address book that monitors registrations and websites. But at the end of this month, the U.S. government will give up overseeing that address book. Republicans call it the internet giveaway.
Let me finish, Senator, if I may. Senator, if I may finish.
No, you may not.
Fireworks fly as lawmakers and experts debate the future of the internet.
The United States government has had supervisory authority over the basic infrastructure of the internet. And as a result, the internet has been a place where free speech is allowed, where there is no censorship, and where people are free to express their views, including their faith.
But in today's subcommittee hearing, Texas Senator Ted Cruz says that's at risk if the United States gives up its special role as guardian of the internet.
Under the Obama administration's proposal, control of the internet would be shifted from the United States government, which ensures the First Amendment is protected, to an international group of stakeholders with no supervision.
But one of the Obama administration's top officials on communications says the plan has been in the works for nearly 20 years and has been promoted by both Democratic and Republican administrations.
The average internet user will not experience any change whatsoever as a result of this transition going through. It's basically just to remove the United States from a very technical role we play today.
Democratic Senator Chris Coons compares the new system to that of the international system of air traffic control.
They're not talking about the content of advertising of those airlines. They're not governing the conversations happening on those airplanes, but there's really one global system for the management of air traffic.
And Commerce Department Assistant Secretary Lauren Strickling says there's nothing to be worried about with the group that's in charge of domain names, the International Corporation for Assigned Names, ICANN.
We don't control the internet today. We don't control ICANN today. What controls ICANN is the set of American businesses, global businesses, technical experts. They are not going to let ICANN be manipulated along the lines that some of the members suggested.
But Senator Cruz says he's worried about repressive governments somehow manipulating the system to censor speech. So he's urging a rider to be added on to a must-pass spending bill that will keep the government open at the end of this month. He's urging that passage to stop the transfer of the government stewardship of the internet. Brian?
Jason Calvi at the Capitol. Thank you, Jason. The ACC follows the NCAA's lead, removing all its athletic championships from North Carolina. These groups disagree with North Carolina's privacy law. It prevents men from using women's bathrooms and locker rooms and vice versa. The NC Values Coalition, a network of North Carolinians advocating for pro-family positions, responds with, "Today, there are too many politicians willing to abandon their closely held beliefs and principles in the face of adversity. People want leaders who will stand up for what is right. How much is it worth to prevent the sexual assault of one little girl in a public bathroom or locker room?" Joining us now, Carrie Kupek, the Legal Communications Director for Alliance Defending Freedom. Can Carolina stand up to this pressure, this economic pressure?
They absolutely can, and they should. The political posturing of the NCAA is nothing short of astounding. Are they planning to merge the men and women's leagues and their teams? It's, they're not just punishing the great people of North Carolina. They're punishing the sports fans. North Carolina is known for sports. Those fans come out in droves. It's a great spirit there, and it's just such a shame that this is what we have come to at a point in our society.
You've got big businesses and celebrities joining in this effort. Why are they getting involved in these political debates?
Your guess is as good as mine. To involve yourself in a cause that forces men and women to undress in front of each other, in shower rooms, in locker rooms, it's ridiculous. And again, the hypocrisy is nothing short of something that something for the books. For instance, you had PayPal and Apple come out in the beginning of this whole debate. They do business with countries that execute people for homosexual behavior. These celebrities are constantly posting pictures of themselves in places like Dubai. Same issue there. So really, we need to go back to common sense and say that men and women should be free to undress and use private, intimate facilities like locker rooms and restrooms by themselves.
The opponents say this law discriminates. How do you answer that?
It's ridiculous. This is about human dignity and respecting everyone's rights to basic bodily privacy. And this is the reason we wear clothing. People are inherently private about their bodies. This is why we wear clothes.
Should be.
Right, exactly. And so that's all this is, maintaining sex-specific shower rooms, locker rooms, restrooms, and ensuring that everyone's dignity interests and everyone's privacy interests is maintained and protected.
Carrie Kupek, the Alliance Defending Freedom. Thanks so much for joining us.
And thanks for having me on.
Up next, a new study shows how religion fuels the U.S. economy. And we take a closer look at the creation of a Middle East safe haven for persecuted religious minorities. On this 14th of September, thanks for joining us on your Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Nearly half a year has passed since the U.S. declared the ISIS oppression of Christians in the Middle East genocide. A Catholic congressman from the Midwest proposes creating a Nineveh Plain province in Iraq for persecuted religious minorities. Nebraska Representative Jeff Fortenberry joining us from Capitol Hill tonight. Congressman, explain briefly this Nineveh Plain province concept.
Yes, well, Brian, as you and people watching are now all too familiar, ISIS has committed genocide against Christians and Yazidis and other minorities in the northern part of Iraq as well as Syria, and it's an absolute horrifying tragedy. This resolution calls for the development of a new province in Iraq in what's called the Nineveh Plain, an ancient pluralistic area where Christians, Yazidis, Muslims, and others live together, and showed how a rich tapestry of the Middle East of diversity is actually possible. What the Nineveh Plain resolution does is it affirms what the Iraqi government has actually already called for in allowing for a safe area, a right of return to people who had to flee from ISIS in this area, It's particularly important because the Battle of Mosul to the south of there is coming. Once the Iraqi government and coalition forces defeat the barbarians, we're afraid that a new refugee push will occur in the north, and it will be almost nearly impossible to get the ancient homeland of Christians and Yazidis and others back. So by doing this, we not only establish a right of return, the principle of pluralism in Iraq, but it creates a safe haven for those who cannot yet return to their home. And this has implications for our own migration policy as well as for Europe's.
Do you expect your resolution to pass? Do you have bipartisan support for it?
We have bipartisan support. There's a certain urgency about it because, as I mentioned, we want to try to do this before the Battle of Mosul so that it creates the conditions by which the resecuritization and the revitalization as well as repatriation of people who once claimed this land is made possible. We have bipartisan support. It's been introduced. We have a short period of time left before the election season, so we're pushing as hard as we can. Hopefully there are some other pieces of legislation that build upon the genocide resolution that actually will be beneficial to the people who have suffered so grievously at the hands of ISIS. So we're pushing. It's being packaged potentially with other pieces of legislation. We've got a lot of work to do.
Jeff Fortenberry, the congressman from Nebraska, we appreciate you being with us. Thank you, Congressman.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Brian.
A fascinating new report finds faith-based businesses, charities, and institutions strengthen the economy in practically every U.S. city and town. The study finds faith-based businesses contribute nearly $440 billion, congregations nearly $420 billion, and other faith-based institutions adding more than $300 billion. That means religion in the U.S. contributes $1.2 trillion each year to our economy and our society. Dr. Brian Grimm is the president of Religious Freedom and Business Foundation. What are you taking into account in this $1.2 trillion contribution to the economy?
We've taken into account the different sectors of faith. There's three that we look at: congregations, which form the basis of all others. Second are faith-based institutions like hospitals, charities, and universities. And third are religion-related businesses or religion-friendly businesses. Focusing strictly on education and healthcare, doesn't the Catholic Church really dominate in this area? Well, it's just a large field of religious players out there, but in terms of the largest healthcare providers, of course, the Catholic hospitals are the largest. Catholic charities are also very large, but it's also part of a large mix. Adventist hospitals are also quite a substantial network. So how does volunteerism play into this whole picture? Well, there's a study by the Pew Research Center that finds religiously active people are much more likely than non-religious people to volunteer their time and to donate time, food, and goods to the poor. So what we find is that religious people are more active in volunteering, and that's really the glue that holds civil society together. And isn't that a tremendous financial contribution if you would put an hourly rate on these hours of volunteerism? Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it's impossible to know all the hours that are being volunteered, but we estimate the individual impact on people to be $171 billion. You could say that's the effect of volunteering. Thank God for that. What might our society look like without this substantial contribution? Well, congregations themselves provide over 1.5 million social and community services. If we wouldn't have faith-based organizations, there'd be 130,000 less job centers, 120,000 less recovery programs, 26,000 less HIV/AIDS ministries. All of these kinds of programs that are done at the local level in your local community would be gone. And certainly the contribution of faith-based organizations and churches goes far beyond monetary. Oh, yeah. Really, this monetary estimate is, there's a saying, if you don't count it, it doesn't count. So part of the goal of this study was to put a number to what sometimes seems uncountable, but we've managed to do that. Very interesting. From the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, Dr. Brian Grimm, thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Grimm volunteers with the Knights of Columbus. We appreciate the Knights' support of EWTN News Nightly. For our EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We leave you tonight with photos from the Pope's general audience in St. Peter's Square today. Good night. God bless.